or good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to IAP2 Canada's and IAP2 USA's monthly learning webinar. It's with great pleasure today that we welcome both Kate and Karen as they provide information on their white papers, which are both on conflict and also conflict management and also evaluation. As we get going with today's webinar, I am going to hand it over to Drew just to give a few housekeeping items and then we'll get going with the rest of the webinar. So Drew, over to you with some housekeeping items, please.
All right, and welcome everybody to this webinar. This webinar is recorded. We always do that. It's one of these value-added things. You can go back and review it for your professional development purposes. And also, we post some collateral material. It could be the slide decks that our presenters use, or links that they have, and of course we'll have links to the white papers in question on this one. So all that will be made available. We usually have it up there within a day or so, and it's usually a lot sooner than that. All your microphones are muted right now. We've got control over that. So if you have muted your microphone yourself, please unmute it, and we'll take care of that. This is interactive, so we encourage you to make comments. You can use the question box to comment or ask questions. You can also raise your hand. There's a little white hand, yellow hand icon that you can click, and that will show Amelia that you've got your hand up, and then we can unmute your microphone at the appropriate moment and give you a chance to ask your question. Or if you're too shy to actually ask the question through the microphone, once again, use your question box to do that. As I say, we're recording this, and we're also going to be sending out a survey afterwards. It'll have some general questions on different ways we can improve the webinar experience for you, and also solicit any suggestions that you've got for future webinars. Certainly, we try to come up with some great ideas, but there's a lot of great ideas out there too, so please make use of the survey and let us know what you think about the overall presentation, and also some ideas you might have for this. So that's about it from the housekeeping end of things. I'm now going to hand it back over to Amelia to get this party started.
Excellent. Well, thank you so very much, Drew. And as I said, a very big welcome to members and non-members alike across the world. We're certainly happy to welcome IAP2 USA, IAP2 Canada, and IAP2 Australasia members and others. So with that, we're going to get going into today's presentation. We're actually going to be starting with Kate and then going on to Karen. So I'm going to introduce both of these ladies now, but then we're going to hand over the webpage to Kate so she can continue with the presentation. Kate Nelischer is a Senior Public Consultation Coordinator with the City of Toronto. She previously helped to initiate the City of Brampton's first Community Engagement Office and worked as the Public Consultation and Design Communications Consultant for Toronto-based firm The Planning Partnership. With a background in landscape architecture and journalism, Kate regularly writes for design and planning-focused publications and sits on the editorial board of Ground Magazine. She is a national board member of YWCA Canada. So Kate, welcome to you, and I'm just going to quickly introduce Karen, and then we'll get right back to you, Kate. So Karen Zypchyn has more than 20 years experience in post-secondary education, communication, and stakeholder engagement. She taught journalism for 10 years at MacEwan University in Edmonton, Alberta, where she led innovation and developments in citizen participation in the news. Since then, she has completed training in public participation, and Karen is now a stakeholder engagement consultant. She is a member of the IAP2 Wild Rose chapter. So with that, Drew, I'm going to ask you to give Kate the screen, and we'll get going with Kate. So Kate, we'll just get you to accept that screen.
Okay, I don't have the opportunity yet to accept it.
So we'll just hand you the screen again, Kate. Let me just try again. Drew, could you try give Kate? Kate, we've given you the screen, so you should be able to accept it.
Sorry, Amelia, nothing's popping up yet.
Okay, so we'll get Drew to take back the screen and we'll try sending it to you again. Drew, if you could take back the screen and send it again. Okay, Kate, did you get that?
Nope, still hasn't popped up. Sorry,
You
Amelia.
should get a little dialog box that's come up somewhere that says show my screen.
I did see that last time we tried it, just a few minutes ago, and it's not popping up at the moment.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if maybe, okay.
Okay, so Drew's got the screen back again. Thank you to everyone for your patience. Kate, you should have received that request again.
Nope, not popping up again.
All right, so
check this out. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you for your patience, everyone, while you wait for us, while we get this technology sorted out. And of course, we're all participation practitioners, or at least many of us are, so we've probably experienced this before. So thank you for just your patience while we do this. And Kate, we're going to try again and sending you the screen. Kate, were you able to get that this time?
Sorry, nothing's popping up, Amelia.
Could Kate, maybe if you minimize what's on your screen right now, it might have popped up behind your presentation.
I'm looking for.
So Kate, I think while we try and get this sorted out, we'll go to Karen, and Drew can continue to work with you behind the scenes to see what we can do. And we just thank everyone for their patience while we get this. We do have other people trying to help out. So Karen, we're going to go to you, and then we'll come back to Kate. Thanks everyone for your patience.
Thank you so much. So thank you very much for having me, and welcome everybody. And we're going to start with evaluation. Just a heads up, this is a very thick topic, and I'll do my best to make it as interesting and entertaining for you as possible, because it is an interesting area in public participation. So I'd like to encourage you, if anybody is a Twitter user out there, here is my handle. Feel free to tweet. And there's 2 Y's there, K Zypchyn. Just think I, but you put Y in place, and that's thanks to my good Ukrainian heritage, a bit of a mouthful. A couple of the hashtags, or a few that you might want to use that I've researched or that are effective, are IEP2, public participation, and interestingly enough, the public engagement hashtag also drops into interesting conversations. So feel free to tweet, please. All right, so today what I hope to do is briefly explain to you my research project. I will explore some challenges in evaluation. I would like to identify for you some interesting themes in the research that I found. There are some key universal evaluation criteria that we will define and look at, as well as some broad evaluation dimensions that can help us understand how to evaluate this very dynamic process of public engagement. I'll highlight some interesting findings in my research throughout my presentation and address the recommended tools that you might find useful at this point to start adapting. And to just sort of wrap up, I'll sort of touch on some main points about reporting on evaluation. So to start with terms, I'm using the IEP2 Canada definition of public participation, any process that involves the public in problem solving or decision making and uses public input to make sustainable decisions. That being said, I just simply wish to point out to you that I'm referring to, of course, public engagement and community engagement as well. So all of these terms are used interchangeably. So why should we even do evaluation in the first place? Well, number one, it helps us know how well our public engagement is indeed working. How effective were our efforts? And importantly, it also helps us be accountable to stakeholders, or if you're working for a client, to your clients as well, or to say political leaders. So people are interested in the results of evaluation. And importantly, it helps us learn and improve. And ultimately, in the end, it's all about establishing our credibility. So I'd like to throw out there a poll question. So I'll go to you, Drew, with that.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Karen. Just a second. There we go. And their poll question is up. So what are your barriers for doing evaluation of public participation? Please select all that apply. So we will just encourage everyone to respond to the poll question that's up there at the moment. And we're going to close it in just a couple of seconds. All right, Drew, let's close that and let's see what the responses are. So lack of evaluation knowledge is 32%. Lack of evaluation training is 36%. A lack of resources, such as time and money, is 50%. A fear of being evaluated is 5%. And lack of organizational buy-in to do evaluation is 45%, Karen. So
Wow.
Interesting results. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm really pleased to hear. Yeah, I'm pleased to hear that people are fearful of being evaluated. But wow, we really need to do a lot more work, it looks like, as well, about resources and getting more buy-in from, our organizations, governments, businesses, wherever we're working, to embrace evaluation. So that's very fascinating. Well, briefly, I'd like to just explain to you what I did do for this paper and how it is that I got the information that perhaps some of you have read, and if not, I'm going over all the main points today. First of all, I focused on more than 100 articles between 2000 and 2015. I focused on very specific criteria to include in my research sample, and I looked for public engagement or public participation evaluation methods, criteria, metrics, and instruments. I also wanted to look for the effectiveness of public engagement. Then I looked at the similarities and differences between amongst all the studies. And what happened was I narrowed down all that 100 articles down to 24 that were most relevant and that focused specifically on evaluation methods, criteria, and metrics, because I know from our previous IAP2 surveys that people would like information. Research fields that in my sample of 24 studies, which was 23 scholarly articles and one really good book written by a lead scholar, here are the fields. Science and technology takes over the most, as you can see, and there's no surprise. The leading researchers in the field, Jean Rowe is one of them, dominate the field of research, and they're in science and technology. I found a lot of studies in land use planning, the environment, health, and then something very specific, evaluation. What I ended up doing was when I looked at the research, I thought about everybody as my end users, and I thought, well, what would we really want to know? Well, we'd really want to know the state of instrument readiness, categorize all the 24 scholarly articles based on the state of the instrument. Was there something ready that we could use as practitioners? So as you can see here in my color code on the right, there's complete instruments, and they're only 12.5% of my sample size. That means 3 out of 24 studies with what I call complete instruments. Those are instruments that have been tested with some statistical rigor, and they're actually provided in the research, and we have a sample template that we can use. Partial instruments are the next. You can see 12.5%. No instruments but adequate evaluation criteria has been examined, is at 41, roughly 42%. And then of course no instruments but a conceptual framework to help us understand how to approach the topic of evaluation of public engagement. So as we can see, very few instruments have been tested. The research field needs to be doing more work in this. But that being said, there are a few, and that's where we see some progress.
So Karen, there's just a quick question here from Melissa. She was just saying if the number of articles was 24 and 10 were, she's put Sheen, that wouldn't be more than 50% is represented. So she was just wondering if there was something about the information that was missing.
I'm just trying to listen there to what she was saying, and I don't think I quite caught that. There's my pie chart is based on 24 studies and breaking them up in terms of the instruments. Perhaps I can come back to that later on and address that. Is that okay?
That sounds great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Some of the challenges in evaluating public evaluation. Obviously, number one that comes up in the research is, well, what do we mean by effectiveness of public engagement? What does that look like? What does a successful public engagement initiative look like? So what's the problem here? Well, the basic challenge is trying to define these variables that are very subjective and full of values. And they consist of many complex variables. They're what we call in the social scientific field multidimensional. Things like effective Also, there are different notions about, research methodologies and how to approach evaluation of public engagement. So there's a battle, and this battle exists in every research field. Maybe you've heard it. It's called quantitative versus qualitative research methodologies. In the quantitative research methodologies, this is what's called a deductive approach. They generally embrace this idea that there are universal generic criteria that are normative, that is, they set norms and expectations that can be applied to all public engagement initiatives. These evaluation criteria, importantly, are established beforehand, and we test them out on some public engagement initiative or project for public engagement effectiveness. What this methodology does is establish standards and allow for us to compare results and, importantly, to generalize findings. Here is an example of a quantitative methodology. Perhaps you're familiar with this: surveys. On the other hand, there are scholars who question that type of quantitative approach to this dynamic process called public engagement. These scholars are in what's called the qualitative methodology school of thought. They take an inductive approach to the issue of evaluating public engagement. Their belief is that public engagement is unique with its own unique specific criteria. The purpose is to establish evaluation criteria with participants and to let those criteria emerge for each public engagement initiative. The qualitative specific results emerge, they're descriptive, and they're like case studies. And importantly, you cannot generalize findings, however, when you do this kind of research. What kind of methods then would this type of methodology embrace? Things like interviews, perhaps you could refer to as debriefing, having some conversation with a project organizer after a public engagement event, observation, or focus group. Another way to think of this, or the same problem, is, are there some universal evaluation criteria versus very specific and unique criteria? So universal evaluation criteria would be ones that apply to all public engagement initiatives, and hence you'll find the concept like global. They can be globally applied. And if we have evaluation criteria that are universal, it leads us to this idea that there are global outcomes, meaning that for every public participation initiative, we expect certain outcomes. And here's an example of one: that we expect participants will want to influence decision making, no matter the public engagement initiative or project. Specific criteria, however, might be what's called context specific. For example, say transportation issue versus infill. Or it's very sensitive to the political context, the social, organizational, or environmental. Perhaps even there's engagement level specific type of criteria. For example, inform versus, say, empower. These types of criteria might be referred to as local or unique, and of course they would have very specific local outcomes that could not be applied to all public engagement initiatives. Example, perhaps in something very particular to infill, the outcome might be to increase citizens' openness to split lots in mature neighborhoods. That would require some specific evaluation criteria that perhaps universal criteria could not capture. So what can we expect? Well, really, the research points to this, that there will be a mixed bag of different evaluation criteria. We'll have universal criteria to deal with, some specific criteria, and perhaps some emerging criteria. That is, criteria that emerges from the specific event that we could not anticipate perhaps beforehand. And this supports the notion that you need a mixed methods approach to be able to capture that type of criteria and to have a more full type of evaluation that has evidence coming from different types of angles. And in fact, in one of my research themes, out of all of my studies, 50% of them used mixed methods to conduct the evaluation. They used things like questionnaires, observation, interview, surveys, media analysis, document analysis, and even something called dialogue analysis. So my recommendation in the white paper is to adopt a mixed methods approach, and really why we want to do that is that it leads to what's called triangulation of evidence. That is, more robust evidence, and that leads to more conclusive findings about how effective our public engagement process and the entire process was. So I'd like to look at some themes. As I mentioned, the research is clear that there are some universal criteria that have emerged. That is, after studying for years and looking at different public engagement activities, there are these universal criteria that are popping up no matter the field, different countries, etc. So these two scholars here, Rowe and Frewer, are well known in the field, and so if you delve into the research, you will be familiar with their names, and they've developed what I call the 9 criteria approach. So they have what are called acceptance criteria, and these are criteria that are based on, from the participants' perspective, what makes a public engagement process fair. Things like representativeness, independence, early involvement, influence, again that's influence on the decision making, and transparency. There are also other criteria that are related to the process, and Rowe and Frewer called these more like competence-based evaluation criteria. Adequate resources, task definition that has to do with, being clearly defined, people knowing what to expect and why they're coming to a public engagement process. Structured decision-making, again, has it been facilitated adequately to be able to get input so it can feed into a decision, and another one called cost effectiveness. Importantly though, Rowe and Frewer advised that maybe not all of these 9 criteria would be used and necessary for each public engagement initiative. And later on, I followed Rowe's work throughout the years. Most scholars and people stop at 2004, but I went on. I find him fascinating, and later on he tested these criteria, and this is very important for us to know. They found that some process and acceptance criteria could not be so easily separated. Basically what that means from a research perspective, for you and I trying to interpret results, separating process from acceptance isn't so simple, and it's complex. So more work needs to be done in defining indicators. What do we mean by representativeness? What do we mean by early involvement? The feedback, interestingly as well, when he tested all of these criteria, was that the participants said in open-ended questions that they defined success of a public engagement event based on learning opportunities. That is, they expected to learn something when they came to a public engagement initiative. So that is yet another one that Rowe has said needs to be included as a universal criteria. And he also realized that public engagement activities that are more on the collaborative and empower end of the spectrum, so dialogue-driven and deliberation, that it's better to understand public engagement initiatives as an information system that must be evaluated for its effectiveness of collecting and transmitting information amongst participants. And they propose that translation quality should be another type of universal criteria that we need to consider. And here's another research theme. Jean Rowe wasn't alone in thinking that learning criteria were important to add to these universal evaluation criteria list. 29% of my studies examined looked at and addressed learning as a universal criteria that must be evaluated for determining the effectiveness of public engagement. So besides those universal criteria, what emerges in the scholarly research, and there's starting to be some agreement here, is that there are 3 broad evaluation dimensions to help us understand what exactly are we evaluating. So those 9 criteria, for example, could fit within these dimensions. But number 1 is context, 2 process, and 3 outputs, outcomes, and impacts. We can understand this conceptual framework with this diagram that I've provided here. This is taken from one of the scholarly articles. So context refers to the institutional, political, cultural, environmental context, and what a Canadian researcher found was that context either inhibits or fosters influences that lead to the success of public engagement. So we need to be evaluating it. Engagement process. That's pretty straightforward. Many of us are steeped in process and the tools that we pick to manage a process. Then we have outcomes and outputs, and impacts can be included there as well. Outcomes deal with things like, say, perhaps actual material changes or social and institutional capital and learning. It often has to do with things like behavior change, capacity building, like leadership building in the community, for example. Outputs are very specific things like aspects of assessments, decisions, actions, actual policies, and recommendations. So more rigorous research is needed to determine, all the relationship between context, process, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. But I have a poll question that I'd like to, sorry there. Hoping you can hear me now. Can you hear me?
Hi, Karen. Yes, we can hear you, but it's,
Something got really ripped off here, so I'm just trying to fix this. I'm hoping that you can hear me right now. So I have a poll question.
So Drew, can we go to that poll question, please? Okay, so the poll question is up, and it says, which one of the 3 evaluation dimensions do participants care the most about? So you've got a choice of context, process, outcomes, and impacts. So if people could please respond to that. All right, Drew, let's close this poll. And Karen, the results are process 32%, outcomes and impacts 68%. So process 32 and outcomes and impact 68%. Back to you.
Sure, and I just want to make sure you can still hear me. Is that good?
Yes, we can hear you just fine. And Karen, just to let you know, you've got about 3-4 minutes left.
Oh my goodness, yeah, I've got a lot to get through still. So anyways, you guys are absolutely right. Outcomes matter the most to our participants. Here are some common outcomes: better decision making and more informed citizenry. These are generally ones we can say that we hope to achieve with most of our public engagement activities. These are hard to measure. For example, better decision making, how indeed are we going to test and evaluate for that? Informed citizenry, that's more in-depth evaluation. In fact, it's called intervention research methods, where you test attitudes of participants before they get into the public engagement event and then after to see if there's been a change in attitude. Obviously, some outcomes require a longer period of time to manifest, such as attitudes and behaviors, so we need to think about short-term outcomes that we're planning for, mid-term outcomes, long-term outcomes. And I propose to you, for example, how long does it take to know citizens or stakeholders have increased trust in a government or organization? Just something that we need to consider. The evaluation tools in my white paper, I recommended the top one. It won an IAP2 Canada award. It's the Public and Patient Engagement Evaluation Tool, designed by Dr. Julia Abelson in the health field. There are 3 questionnaires with open-ended questions and some demographic data. Importantly, you'll see that there's participants, a questionnaire for project organizers, and questionnaire for leadership that gets at the issues of context, process, and outputs, outcomes, and impacts. All of those 3 evaluation dimensions are addressed in this questionnaire. It's available in English and French, and all you have to do is put in that search term, Public and Patient Engagement Evaluation Tool, and you will find that tool online and be able to get it free. Guess what? Another research theme emerged. 38% of the studies in my sample used multiple evaluators, and this highlights the all-important issue that who evaluates does indeed matter. And they agreed as well with Dr. Julia Abelson that people like participants, project organizers, external consultants, and leaders had to be evaluating the effectiveness of our public engagement initiatives. The next tool is called a European tool. It emerged from scholars in Europe in the environment field. It's a very different tool. It's called the Comparison of Participatory Processes tool. It's included at the end of my white paper, and it's linked to outcomes. It leads to all of those dimensions are addressed: context, process, outputs, impacts, and outcomes. And it yields descriptive data in a very different way than does the questionnaires, but it allows you to compare different participatory processes over a period of time and try to see if there are connections and relationships between things like certain contexts and, say, the outcomes. This tool can be adapted. Obviously, what you see here on the screen, you might think this isn't related to my field, but it's a good template to look at. And we can adapt it to shape it to your specific situation. Well, what do we do after the evaluation results are in? This is a big field, and I just wish to touch on this very briefly. Reporting the results is important. And what I'd like to stress to you is that different stakeholders have different expectations of the results and different needs. That is, participants, your public engagement project organizers, and your leadership. So please consider how you present the evaluation results so that they meet the stakeholders' needs. Also, using the results. What I'd like to suggest is, obviously, many of us monitor during the public engagement process and we make changes accordingly. And so that is indeed encouraged in some of the research as well, to acknowledge that we are constantly changing and responding to issues as they arise. And that should be recorded in part of the evaluation. We can interpret the results as well to make future changes and recommendations in our public engagement practices, and importantly, urge you to be looking for relationships between the context, the process, the actual tools and techniques used where they're appropriate, and then linking them to the outputs and the outcomes and impacts. And how effective was our public engagement for feeding into a decision? What were the ultimate results? So people want to see these results. It's about transparency and credibility again, that when we do evaluation, we need to be accountable for what went on and admit where things can improve. Just a summary then of our lessons learned today. More work in public participation evaluation research. However, we have some tools that can help us. 3 broad evaluation dimensions have emerged that give us a good framework for us to use: context, process, outputs, outcomes, and impact. The 9 evaluation criteria established as universal criteria may be of help to us. Obviously, the theme that has emerged here is that we need to use mixed methods to do evaluation, and importantly, we need to consider planning for learning outcomes in our public engagement planning. And that is not designed by communications people, but rather by people with instructional design who understand how to create a learning opportunity, because people want to learn when they come out to our public engagement processes, no matter what it is. That's what stood out for me in the research. And importantly, we can use and adapt a couple of evaluation tools that are now available and help make a contribution to the field by adapting those tools and just starting to use them. I'm happy to help out, so feel free to speak to me. I'm very limited today about all the stuff that I learned by reading all this. Discuss more with people who are interested, so feel free to reach me. And I'm also part of the City of Edmonton's Council Initiative on Public Engagement, so I've been applying the evidence in this white paper to an actual real situation. So I've had some experience even using these tools and adapting them for my own clients. It's been successful with the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues, plus an experiential collaborative learning project I did with a post-secondary institution and a community organization focused on poverty in Edmonton. I will be presenting in Toronto at a workshop. That's at the Public Consultation Engagement Summit in Toronto, so maybe I'll see people there.
Thanks, Karen. So, Karen, there's a couple of questions that I'm going to ask you because they're clarification questions regarding your presentation. But in the same breath, we're going to try and get Kate up and running too. Drew now has her PowerPoint, so you're going to see us switching screens while you're responding to your questions so that we can make sure that we see Kate's PowerPoint and that we can also hear her. So the questions that I have for you are sorry, let me just get here. The finding about participants wanting to learn is really interesting. This comes from Larry. What additional context do you have about those participants? So who's telling people that they want to learn? In your research, did you find out more about that?
Well, what happened is that when there were open-ended questions, like in particular, the people who were in the There's universal criteria that exist, we know, and they tested for them. They had open-ended questions. And what emerged in different fields, not just with Jean Rowe, who really, has led the way, was that the participants wrote and they said that was just not expected at all, that they came and they wanted to learn from each other. So there was in fact social learning that was identified, plus learning for the topic at hand. And in fact, in one of the research papers I looked at, they developed this very lengthy survey questions testing for, did they learn anything about, I believe it was climate change, something very complex, and obviously an ongoing issue that we all have to deal with. That's, to engage people.
So just from your perspective, then, the participants were just general participants participating in a consultation process. So
yes.
they weren't students specifically or academic specifically. Nope. They were just any old participants participating.
You bet, and a
Terrific.
Wide variety. Yeah.
Excellent. Sorry, I'm really cognizant of time, Karen, so I do want to get on to Kate. So I'm just going to leave something with you, and then we'll come back to it at the end, and that way it gives you a bit of time to research it too. Stephen was asking, are there any apps yet similar to Yelp for public meetings? So I'm going to leave that with you as we switch to Kate, and we'll come back in a few minutes. Thanks. Kate, so can we hear you now?
I hope so.
We can. So Kate,
okay, great.
Drew is going to change the PowerPoint slides and we'll get on to your presentation. And Karen, thank you so much for yours.
Fantastic. Thanks, Karen. That was a wonderful presentation. And again, thank you, Amelia and Drew, for having me today. I'm very happy to be talking with everyone today and sharing a bit of what I learned throughout this process. So again, my presentation is going to focus on conflict management and public participation. So I'll move right along because I know we're short on time. To slide 2, please, Drew. So conflict management in relation to public participation. I'm sure as all of you work in this field, you understand that it's a key issue and one that certainly members of IAP2 Canada are interested in. You may have also responded to a survey that IAP2 Canada put out in 2013, and the results of that came out in 2014, indicating that 93% of the membership were interested in learning about research-based trends, best practices, innovation, and public participation, and of course, conflict management. So I do want to applaud IAP2 Canada in kind of listening to the members and understanding what they were looking for to advance their own practices. So I responded to that call for researchers and writers to fill that need and to create a white paper on public participation and conflict management. And that was released earlier this year. You may have had a chance to review it. If not, it's on the website if you're interested. Next slide, please, Drew. So the goal of this initiative was, of course, to meet the educational needs of IAP2 members, but to provide insight into current research in the area of conflict management. We really wanted to provide an overview to members of a few new and exciting approaches and demonstrate how these approaches can be used in your own professional practices, whether you work in the public sector, private sector, nonprofit sector, and how you can integrate these processes. So I want to start us off to the next slide, please, Drew, with a couple of definitions that I think are important to go over first. The first one I use of conflict is up on your screen there, and of conflict management. So these both helped to frame the research that I created and my own writing and analysis of that and how that can feed into to the practice of IAP2 members. And I do want to point out here that the research committee of IAP2 Canada provided wonderful leadership throughout this entire process and gave great feedback. They were really an important part of this research and writing process. I also want to point out that in bold there you'll see conflict can be a good thing, and I think that mentality is important to go into this project with, that it gets a bad reputation, but as many of you will know working in public participation, that conflict can also bring about deeper communication, deeper discussion, and can lead to stronger solutions when you get past those conflicts. So I think it can be a great thing if you know how to handle it and how to work with it. Next slide, please, Drew. So a few, again, of the frames that I set out with and in undertaking this process. Conflict results from discrepancies, number one, in values, and that was the one that that stood out throughout all of the methods we looked at. And we did only profile 4, but we did look at a number of other methods as well, and that was the one that stood out as central to all of these conflict discussions. Again, interest and levels of power also play into that. And of course, conflict can be influenced by many different things, experiences, backgrounds, etc., and kinds of conflict. So these are also 2 frames that I'm looking at for all of the research that I went through. The first being task, results from differences in judgment and lack of consensus, and the second being team conflict, based on emotional and interpersonal struggles. And these are both valuable kinds of conflict. They can be constructive, and they present different challenges as well. Next slide, please, Drew. So I want to throw it back to everyone on the call today, and as you're all professionals and I'm sure know a lot about this and have dealt with this in your everyday lives and professional practices, I'm wondering what are your preferred conflict resolution methods? And since this is not a poll question, I'd ask you to type your responses in the question box, and maybe Amelia can help us out by reading back some responses if everyone is interested, and then we can go through and see who uses most methods and what methods you're interested in. As the results are coming in, I'll just keep going along on these slides.
Thanks, Kate. We're just waiting for some people to respond in the question box, and as soon as I get that, I will add them to you. Oh, here we go. Here's a few coming in. Really, from Drew, set out the rules of discussion. So the rules of discussion right at the get-go. From Larry, mediation and facilitation. And that's it for now. So we'll wait to see what other people have to say. So I'll come back in as we get more. Back to you,
Great.
Kate.
Thanks, Amelia. That's a great start. Thanks, Drew and Larry. That's helpful and good to get our minds kind of thinking about these different methods that we use every day. The goal of conflict management, I think, is a good place to start when we delve into the examples that we researched, is to reach an outcome that all parties can support. And I think that it's important to note that consensus is not a realistic expectation in a conflict environment. I have found in my own practice, both within the public and the private sector, that clients are often hoping to reach consensus. And their idea of success of a public participation process is that everyone is happy and agrees upon the final answer, and that was the top answer and solution for everyone. And I think that that is a very difficult thing to achieve, especially in more complex programs and projects. And we need to understand that something that everyone can support, even though there may be discrepancies, it is a more realistic vision of the outcome of a conflict management process. Next slide, please, Jim. So as I mentioned earlier, the white paper profiles 4 conflict management methods. Just want to make sure. Drew, could you move to the next? Oh, great. Profiles 4 conflict management methods. There are many, many methods, and many methods that are incredibly interesting that I would love to delve into, but we really had a goal of producing a document in the white paper that would be accessible and clear and concise for members, and not something that was too dense to have to go through, and something that you could use as a resource. So we did choose 5 or 4 methods to go through instead. And again, they kind of operate under 2 general assumptions. One, that participation is equitable, and that conflicts are based in values, which I touched on earlier. So those 4 methods, as you can see on your screen: circles, deliberative participation, gamification, and dramatic problem solving. I'm sure some of you will have used some of these, maybe all of them, and so we'd like to throw out the next poll to get a sense of your familiarity with these methods, and hopefully that will play into the discussion. So hopefully you can see the poll on your screen there. Thanks, Drew. So I'm wondering if you've used any of these methods, and you can select all or choose a none of above as well.
Excellent. Well, Kate, while people are responding to that, we did get a couple of other suggestions coming in from
great.
your participants. From Christina, it was answering questions effectively. So that was from Christina. From Francesca, structured go-arounds to share power in committee meetings and hear all voices while airing issues and gathering feedback, and that was from Francesca. And I have to admit, I'm going to talk about Patrick's as well. It wasn't really a specific way of doing things, but he said singing really loud in the truck on the way home after. And I thought that was hilarious. So I think humor eventually comes into this as well. So we're going to close this question. Drew, we'll take a look at the results. And the results, circles are 52%, deliberative participation is 52%, gamification 13%, dramatic problem solving 22%, and none of the above at 35%. So Kate, back to you.
Fantastic. Thanks everyone for responding to that. It gives me a good sense of where everyone is at, and as I suspected, there is a lot of experience on the call today, and also some people learning about these methods for the first time, which is really exciting. So I'm hoping to share a bit of information with you as well. So I'm going to dive in and give you a little bit of a brief overview of these 4 methods, and I would encourage you to go and look at the white paper if you are interested, and also to look at the works cited list. There are wonderful resources out there on each of these methods if you're interested. So circles is the method derived from through a book that was recommended to me called Doing Democracies in Circles, and it was about using this method within the urban planning and rural planning context. The goals of this method are to strengthen community and foster understanding and build relationships. And it really operates around the principle that we should nurture our shared values. That goes back to what I was saying earlier about values being the core of conflict and conflict management as well. So the benefits of this, this method, as one of the commenters said, it's really important to ensure that everyone has a chance to participate and everyone has a chance to share power, and this is exemplified in circles, definitely. People engage on an equitable level, on the mental, physical, and emotional and spiritual levels, and everyone is respected for the role they play in the circle. Next slide, please, Drew. So this is a little bit of a summary about how it works. It is, for me, I haven't personally used this method, which is part of why I find it so interesting, and I'd love to get the opportunity to use it. But the one point that you'll see, number 2, the facilitator or keeper, which is a role that many of us on the call play, actually develops guidelines for interaction, but is an equal participant and is not expected to remain objective. And so that kind of equals the power sharing around the room and allows everyone to feel that they are able to contribute effectively, which I think is a really important piece. And then again, with the talking piece, which is a physical object that's passed around, and anyone who has the object can talk, and that really helps to guide the discussion and help maintain a calm and respectful atmosphere, which I think is a great thing. Next slide, please, Drew. So I've related these, you'll notice in the white paper as well, in a chart later on in the document, related each of these methods to the IAP2 public participation spectrum. So circles itself can be applied to the collaborate and empower stages because it is about sharing that power. And notice that image up on the screen is an image from the CBC News article about the use of circles in a Vancouver program called Warriors Against Violence, and helping men to overcome systematic violence against women in their communities. And this is, you know, it's been used in many other environments, office environments, schools. It really can apply to different groups and also different sizes of groups. Where if you have a large group, you can nominate people who share your values and your opinions to sit within the circle and participate more actively in the discussion. Next slide, please, Drew. So moving right along to deliberative participation, this is one that it seems like a lot of people on the call have used as well. It's an excellent method for delving into really complex problems and working out difficult conflicts as well. And again, participants are treated as equal players, but they don't play equal roles. So there are people who come in with different experiences and they're brought in specifically to share knowledge and information. And decision making is based on facts and values. So a key part of deliberative participation, as many of you will know, is that research is provided to participants beforehand, so everyone is able to come to the table with a level of knowledge that helps them to discuss the critical issues and work through their conflicts in a more productive manner. And it really allows for that deep and thoughtful conversation about a topic and helps people to understand each other's perspective. Next slide, please, Drew. In relation to IAP2 spectrum, involve to empower, it really covers the gamut here. And it can be used in different ways, in different groups, definitely for different projects. It's often used for policy decision making, which I think is a great use of this method. The example I've noted up on the screen is an example from Texas about wind energy farms. I know we're doing that in Ontario quite often as well now. A lot of resistance to that, a lot of conflict around those discussions. This is a really interesting way to work through that and to also provide participants in the discussion, key stakeholders, with the information needed to inform themselves and to make decisions as a group. Next slide, please, June. So the next one is a really fun one, which I'm very excited about, a gamification. Many of you will probably have used elements of this in your projects. I know Amelia has wonderful experience with this, and she actually won an INC2 award based on her work with gamification. And so this involves participants in playing games. It's really simple. It's to collaborate and achieve a common goal and resolve conflicts. You know, games are an active method to get people out of their comfort zone, interacting with each other, focusing on a goal that is maybe not directly focusing on the conflict at hand, but adjacent to it. And so it allows people to have a little fun and to work through issues as well. Next slide, please, June. The photo you'll notice up on the slide is actually of a really exciting game called the Empathy Toy, created by 21 Toys. And it's just one of the examples that I looked at. And actually had a chance to use one of these. This was created by a Toronto-based social entrepreneur, and this is a way of building trust and respect and strength within a group working through conflict. And so the group works together, blindfolded, as you'll see in that image, and with partners to help to create and solve a physical puzzle made of wood. And you know, when I tried it with a group that I was unfamiliar with, it was really a great opportunity in just a few moments to create really strong connections with your team and with the people around the table, and lay the groundwork for dealing with some really difficult and interesting discussions. Another great example of this use within Toronto Community Housing Project. Toronto Community Housing has been a long advocate of participatory budgeting, which is really interesting. And a few years ago, a man named Josh Lerner came in to help them out with participatory budgeting and actually implemented a number of games, kind of Wheel of Fortune style games, to get people to propose projects in their neighborhoods, in their housing, in their buildings that would benefit their community, and to get others to vote on those and to work through different issues together about what might be the challenges to implementing those projects. So Josh Lerner has a wonderful book on gamification if you're interested, about how to make democracy fun, so it's a great resource as well. The fourth and final method that I profiled is called dramatic problem solving. I noticed in the poll that I think not many people responded that they had used this one, and this one is new to me as well. And it's definitely one that takes more thought and time in preparing to facilitate a conversation around conflicts and other issues that you may want to tackle in your public participation program. But I think it's an effective one. And it really involves theater, something called forum theater, which is used to engage participants in the community in a theater production, in creating it, in performing it, and engaging an audience, all with the end goal of actually making social change. So these are, they're not just for fun. Of course, there is an element of fun there, but the goal is really to get yourself out of your comfort zone, similar to gamification, and allow yourself to come up with stories, with examples, with roles for your fellow actors and participants that will help you to think about the conflict in a new way, think about these issues differently, and work through them together. Relationships to the IEP2 spectrum. Drew, if you would pass the next slide, please. Opportunities at all points in the spectrum for just informing, to inform a community of an issue at hand. Actors can play a role doing that. Actors can involve an audience. The actors themselves can be the participants, stakeholders, and decision makers as well. And in creating a performance can work through those issues. There's the image that you see on your screen there is from the National Forum Theatre in 2014 with a gathering in Nepal to specifically explore ways that theatre can address conflict management and conflict transformation. There's a documentary about this event available online if you're interested in learning more as well. Next slide, please. So I realize that I went through these quickly in the interest of time, but I think that throughout these 4 methods and many others that participants on the call listed, and others that will come up later in conversation, it's important to start by understanding the conflict at hand. If you have conflict, where it's coming from, who is involved, and then moving on to determining the most appropriate method for managing that conflict as well. And so that's the end of the presentation. I would like to go back to Amelia at this time to see if there are any questions, but also to thank you all for your attendance today and for participating.
Well, thank you very much, Kate, and thank you very much for hanging in there while we sorted technology out, and I certainly hope that everyone's appreciated Kate's presentation today. This is the opportunity to open it up to questions both for Kate and Karen, so we'd certainly appreciate receiving them. And Kate, just so that you know, there was a number of people that were saying, really wondering what the dramatic conflict management tool was, so we do appreciate you taking the time to explain that, because I think that definitely is one of the ones that's perhaps a little newer and perhaps not in most of our toolboxes at the moment. And also gamification, I can't say enough, it really worked when we did it with TransLink back in 2010, so it was a while ago, but it really gave people that opportunity to learn about what the problems and the issues are, and then working together they came out with potential solutions. And in fact, in our case, both the board and councils approved many of the decisions that they had come up with, or the suggestions and recommendations. So it's very much all about ownership. So they were sort of definitely understanding and learning about the problem, owning it, and owning the problem, and then potentially owning the solution. So I don't know if we have others on the call today that have also used gamification, but there's some really great examples out there. So let's open it up to questions from our participants, and we have a number of them. I think we're going to start with Karen first. So Karen, if you can open up your mic as well, and we can involve you in the response to these. So the first one is just really trying to understand what the lowest hanging fruit for a P2 practitioner who wants to improve evaluation in his organization. What's the first thing that I could do to make evaluation better? So Karen, over to you for that one.
Sure. Really, I think we need to be doing evaluation up front, early, right from the very get-go. It's often an afterthought, and it creates all kinds of problems. You want to also possibly engage stakeholders as well. And I know it's time-consuming to do that, but I would tell you, I've done it, and the research is clear. Like, there's processes, needs to be important, but what people care the most about are the outcomes. So I would highly recommend engage your stakeholders, find a public engagement method to engage them, and to co-create some outcomes that might be very specific to the particular context, and therefore you get people buying in at an early stage. And because there's multiple evaluators, why don't you get not only your participants, but the project organizer and the leadership involved as well, because then people start to feel buy-in. So that's what I would suggest for evaluation. Basic things still really matter, like communicate clearly. I mean, I've gone to public engagement events myself, and so I consume the information, and it's not always digestible. You know, we need visual graphics. There needs to be less text, more pictures. We're moving in this mobile world and how people are being influenced, how they take in information. We need to be paying attention to that when we want to create communication and resources to be informing our participants to come out. So that's still really important as well. I'd like to throw out there. Process does matter, but I'll tell you what, the research was clear. Your process may need to be some tweaking there and people not too happy about it, but that doesn't prevent them from coming out again in the future when they see that maybe they had some influence. That is, there was an outcome that they expected. So I found that interesting in the research, and I hope that answers your question.
Great. Thanks very much, Karen. And just to let a number of people have asked for more information. And of course, you have the white papers. Everyone should have the white papers. But specifically, Karen, people are trying to get hold of the Abelson instrument, and
Yes.
they've been unsuccessful trying to find it on the internet. So
Okay.
we will provide a link to that. So Karen will give us that information. And when we send out the recording and the PowerPoints from today's presentations, we will make sure that that's included with it as well. So earlier on, Karen, we asked you a question about whether or not there were any other apps out there regarding Yelp for public meetings. Do you know if there's any similar apps out there?
I am not. I mean, my background was teaching, right, journalism and dealing with all these different apps. The field is always like just growing exponentially and trying to stay up on it, so no, I don't. But I would just frame your question about, you know, what I look at the research on usage of social media tools versus specific online platforms made for public engagement. I think that I will declare my bias. I would definitely think that there's probably better specific online engagement tools out there that are designed with public engagement in mind that might be more effective than generic social media tools out there. And that's all I can offer.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. And there was a question right at the beginning, but Melissa, I think I'm going to ask you to contact Karen directly. You will have Karen's information. I think it was a little bit more specific into the actual research and the methodology on what you had done, Karen. So I will encourage Melissa to contact you directly in order to find that information. This is a question for both of you. Because both of you talked about consensus, and I'm going to start with Kate and then Karen, if you could respond. If the goal is consensus, then please clarify what qualifies as consensus. Is it total agreement, which is 100% among participants, or just a majority greater than 50%, or should consensus always be qualified as to its degree of agreement? Kate, did you want to?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Amelia. Well, I would say to begin with that consensus is not the goal of conflict management and conflict resolution. I think that, which I touched on, I think earlier in the slides, that the goal is to reach an outcome that everyone can support. That doesn't mean that there will be full agreement, and that doesn't mean that there's just a majority vote. That means that you will have some compromise in the solution, but that everyone can walk away feeling confident about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Karen, anything that you want to add?
Yeah. I find this a fascinating question. I love it because I'm coming from the field of journalism where I think debate is healthy and you can't expect people to agree. So I agree that I don't think a consensus is always the goal, but what I would specify is this, that maybe consensus may be needed for very particular little elements of, say, a public engagement process. So narrow down for what exactly, what issue, what element in some decision-making or policy-making endeavor, where is that consensus needed, and focus on it. So it may not be the entire thing, because what came out in the research, and I'd really like this to stress to everybody, is people get upset when we don't, in the evaluation results, do not make clear where people disagree. So it sent to me this message that people want to have acknowledgement where disagreement exists. So, and I just wish to share that. I can't answer fully there, but I would say narrow down where consensus is needed and question where indeed it is needed, as to support what Kate said.
Thanks very much. So I think that I'm going to continue to leave it open for a couple more questions, just in case anybody else does have any other questions that they might want to ask of our two panelists. I also really want to take this time to say a big thank you to both Kate and Karen on behalf of IAP2 USA, IAP2 Canada, and IAP2 Australasia. First of all, these were the very first two white papers that were ever done, and of course they were done on behalf of IAP2 Canada, but shared with all of our colleagues worldwide. I know that there is hope to do some additional white papers next year, so we would also really appreciate your feedback on the white papers themselves. Did you find these interesting? Were they helpful? Have you been able to use them? All of those types of things. So that is certainly something that your affiliates would like to know, as well as we continue to see what our role is in research, because that's an important one. And with that, I just want to quickly talk a little bit about the IAP2 Canada Research Committee. It was formed in 2013 and includes members from the BC, Wild Rose, and Great Lakes chapter. It has a threefold mandate to share evidence-based knowledge with members and develop partnerships and cross-disciplinary networking opportunities. In fact, it does provide members with access to P2 research, and not just in Canada, but right across the world, because we do make this available to other IAP2 Canada members. And it provides opportunities for IAP2 Canada members and others to connect with researchers and research organizations. So they're continuing to work on many different initiatives, including a very interactive research session, which will be happening at the Montreal conference. And as mentioned, there will be 2 more white papers that will be coming out in the next little while, and they also hope to be able to continue to provide webinars such as this, so where research connects with practitioners and how practitioners can use that information. If anyone on the line is interested in being part of the IAP2 Canada Research Committee, it's always open. It's open not to just Canadians, but anybody else that has any interest in research, so please don't hesitate to let us know. You can reach us at info@iap2canada.ca or info@iap2usa.org, and we'd be happy to include you with those research committees. So I'm not getting too many more questions. Oh, but what I would like to do is I'm going to give both Karen and Kate an opportunity to say a last word, and then I will close it out. So Karen, it sounds as though you were anxious to get on, so why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much, and I hope I've done my best to make a very complex research topic digestible. And what I'd like to urge you is that I created a table at the end of the white paper. That was what I call my Alzheimer's prevention. I coded for 144 variables, hoping to make the research easy for you to find that would be useful to you. So please take a look at the tables I created. I divided the research up and to encourage you to go into it and read it based on the evaluation criteria. I listed out whether instruments were provided or not, and if they were complete or not, but also the field is identified. So if you're in the health field, for example, you might find health studies of particular interest. But I really did my best to encourage you to go into the research and get it yourself and get it in your hands. It's just so much more useful to follow through and study a little bit on your own, and not all research hurts. There's some better written research out there that I think will help everybody.
Thanks, Karen. Kate?
Oh, sorry, I think I was muted there. I did want to say thank you to you, Amelia, for setting up the call, and to Drew. It was wonderful to be able to participate today. And to Karen, you gave a wonderful presentation. I also want to echo what you had said earlier, Amelia, about the research committee. They're doing fantastic work and will continue to, so I'm really excited to see what comes out of that committee in the future as well.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for participating. We are currently working on our September webinar, and then our October-November webinar. We're going to celebrate our Core Value Award winners, and of course they will be identified at our Core Value Awards Gala, which will be happening on September 29th in Montreal. So we know that October and November's webinars are already underway, and September we're hoping to do something on how to gain internal commitment within your organization to practice good public participation. So hang tight to that, and we'll see what we can do about setting that up. But for now, I want to sincerely thank everyone for participating. We really welcome the interactivity and your questions. And of course, thank you, Karen and Kate, and we'll talk to everyone soon. Enjoy the rest of your summer, everyone. Take care now. Bye-bye.